everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing my reading wrap-up for the books I read in November. So in November I had a pretty good reading month. I ended up reading 7 books. 4 of those were physical books and 3 of those were audiobooks. In terms of ratings, I think most of my books ended up being in like the 3 to 4 star range, so nothing terrible, but nothing necessarily very standout as well. I didn't read any books for nonfiction November, which I had originally planned to do, but I found that just by being in graduate school, I'm reading like nonfiction works pretty much every single day. So I'm not really in the mood to read a lot of nonfiction for pleasure. I think if I end up reading some more nonfiction books, it just makes more sense for me to do that during my winter break or my summer break. So I just don't think I'll be participating in a traditional nonfiction November in the future. That being said, I did read a lot of books that were on my TBR for this month, as well as some things that were on my more long-term TBR, so I'm very pleased that I got them checked off my list. So I think with that intro out of the way, we can get into talking about the books that I read this month. The first book we're going to be talking about is Elektra by Jennifer Saint. This is a Greek mythology retelling that focuses on Agamemnon's family, both before and after the Trojan War. It's mainly told through 3 different perspectives of Elektra, Clytemnestra, and Cassandra. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I was thinking about moving it up to a 3.5 initially when I read it, but compared to some of the other books this month, I think it was a little bit more on the lower end of the spectrum. For one, I think this book should have been called Clytemnestra over Elektra. I feel like she's much more of the interesting character here, and she's the one that has more agency and is moving the story along. I think the main reason why I wasn't super connected with this book is that I just don't really like Agamemnon very much, so I couldn't really see Elektra's point of view and why she loved him. I think that was also kind of hindered by the fact that within the story we don't see Agamemnon very much. There's not only, I think, one-ish scene of him and Elektra when Elektra is young that kind of gives the basis for why she loves him as her father so much. And at the same time, that was also very surface level and not super heartwarming in any way. So I think it just didn't really lead to me caring very much for Agamemnon as a good person. And I think we really needed to have that in order to get over some of the big hurdles in his character flaws for us to then want to support Elektra in the story over Clytemnestra. A big theme in the story is about the cycle of revenge that is really at the heart of Agamemnon's family, both in the present and past timelines, and how that back and forth will always lead to bloodshed. I feel like the epilogue of this book was so rushed and really didn't make a lot of sense. I guess that Jennifer Saint was trying to include the ending of the original myth, but it just felt like it was changing the story and not making the focus that much on Elektra or Clytemnestra in the end. I feel like she should have just chose for an ending that didn't really involve Orestes. It would have been much better for the themes of the book to make sense. I think also I was more prone to dislike this book because I had already heard a version of this original myth in 10,000 Ships, and the version of the story told in that book just focuses on Clytemnestra, so I feel like I was predisposed to like her story more. That being said, I still do like Jennifer Saint's writing style, and I really enjoyed Ariadne, so I'm definitely going to look at the future books that she ends up releasing. I think the next book she is coming out, I really don't know anything about the original myth, and I think going in blind to her stories is definitely the preferred way that I have learned to consume them. The next book I read this month was Anatomy by Dana Scwartz. This is a YA historical fantasy. The main character, Hazel, wants to be a surgeon, but it's the old-timey days when women weren't really allowed to do anything. So she enlists the help of a grave robber named Jack to help dig up bodies for her to practice on to then take the medical exam required for her to become a surgeon. This gives me very much Ladies' Guide to Petticoats and Piracy energy, but for some reason I find Hazel to be a lot more annoying than Felicity. I think a big thing is that she has really no regard for how much of her life is at stake in her leaning into certain societal expectations. For a lot of the book I was like, girl, if your mom is telling you how much your future well-being and life is hinging on you marrying your cousin, then you need to take that shit more seriously. And with Bernard, I feel like we needed to see him being an ass earlier on to give us as readers more of a reason for why Hazel didn't want to marry him. Besides the fact that he's her cousin, but it was the old-timey days, people did that all the time. In the beginning, we only really see him more as they're being mismatched in terms of intellect and things that they're interested in. And it kind of just makes Hazel seem like she's leading him on while she's at the same time pursuing Jack. And with that, I feel like it's giving him what I would call the Commodore Norrington effect of having him be more pitiful than threatening. A positive note on this book is that I did think it had a lot of twists and was not predictable at all. I feel like I had no idea where the ending was going to go, and that was one of the main things that was compelling me to read more. However, I did think the ending was very rushed and quite strange, and was very strong sequel bait energy. I honestly didn't care about the story that much to try and read the second one when it comes out. The next book on this list is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This is a domestic thriller that is about a married couple that is going on a retreat to a remote chapel turned Airbnb to rekindle their marriage. There's a present timeline of the couple when they're at the vacation home, and also a series of letters that chronicle the wife's feelings over the last 10 years of marriage. I know that Alice Feeney is a little bit of a controversial figure on BookTube, not necessarily that she's done anything bad, but just a lot of people don't really like her books. And I honestly am a little embarrassed by how much I like this. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and I definitely want to read more of Alice Feeney's work in the future. I will say the very first 50 pages were very much cringe city. There's a lot of strange things in the writing that I really didn't jive with. So Jamie from Jamie's Library was reading a Lucy Foley book in a reading vlog, and she mentions that Lucy Foley will do this thing that she considers kind of like a juvenile writing technique, where the end of the chapter will end on this really dramatic thing, but then the start of the next chapter will really like diffuse all the tension by going, oh, it was nothing. And I feel like Alice Feeney does the same thing. But she will also throw in these very, like, innocuous, strange, like, hints in the middle of the chapter, and I'll be like, wait, what the fuck is that? I feel like that leads me to want to know more, and it just kind of makes the overall progression of the mystery build up so it's not just cheap one-liners in the end. I totally did not anticipate what the twist was, and at first I didn't like it, but then there was like 4 twists in a row, and I was in shock with each one. So I feel like even though there was aspects of the writing that I considered cringy, I feel like I liked overall the story and like the thriller aspects of it. I definitely will be checking out more of Alice Feeney's work in the future. I actually already checked out another one of her books that I'm going to be reading probably the next month. So I'm quite pleased with my first foray into like the thriller genre. The next book we are going to be talking about is Horrid by Katrina Leno. This is a YA horror novel. After her father's untimely death, the main character Jane and her mother Ruth end up moving across the country to Ruth's ancestral decrepit family home. So at first seems like just grief and fear of this new place ends up revealing itself to be a supernatural presence in the family home that ends up revealing secrets of Ruth's family life. The main character has pica, and she uses it as a coping mechanism to heal with her anger issues. She also has a lot of grief from the loss of her father. So I feel like this is one of those horror stories where the ghosts are like more of a metaphor for the ghosts of one's own past and how generational trauma can come back to haunt you. There are very many aspects of this book that make it read very heavily YA. So much of Jane's life is just that of a typical teenager. She's worried about going ready for the dance and that she has a crush on someone at her part-time job. And I feel like all of those very blatant YA aspects kind of lull you into a false sense of security. So when the ending comes, you're like, what the hell did I just read? There's so many aspects in this book that can go in so many different directions that I was just kind of guessing random twists and being wrong in all of them. The ending is quite unsettling and also very unhinged, and I feel like it's something that I'm going to have to sit with for quite a while. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to check out some of Katrina Leno's other books. The next book on this list is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is about a boarding school for girls that is on a remote island that ends up getting quarantined because of a mysterious illness, which causes all of the girls to mutate to horrific effects. When the best friend of the main character, Hetty, goes missing, she sets out to find her friend and also find the secrets the outside world has been keeping from them. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. Talking about the audiobook, I really disliked by its actor. I thought it was like a choice for her to speak in a stilted way to kind of like show her waking up from being on morphine. But no, her performance was just stilted for really no reason. That kind of niche critique aside, I did really like the rest of this book. I think the ending had just the right level of detail kind of documenting the reasoning behind the illness. It also had a very similar reasoning to one of my favorite X-Files episodes, so I think that kind of like arbitrary association made me like it even more. I do like the open-ended aspect of the ending of this book. I feel like it gives a sense of hopefulness that otherwise you would be hard-pressed to find in the scenario that they're in. I did feel like we didn't get as much body horror as I would have initially expected from a book with this type of concept. I think I would have enjoyed just a little bit more of that. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I can see why it's quite beloved in this kind of like subgenre of YA horror. The next book we were going to be talking about is Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. This book is about 5 rich, thrill-seeking friends who decide to rent an abandoned Japanese mansion for an elopement, but it soon unravels as supernatural forces threaten to tear them apart. This book I ended up giving 2 stars, which was such a letdown. I knew that this book was somewhat disliked on BookTube, but I never really knew why. Character-wise, this book has very much bodies, bodies, bodies energy, with everyone acting like friends but secretly hating each other. And while there are some interesting things here, and I do think the characters are fleshed out, they are really like just fighting for their lives against how overworked the writing style is. The writing is just doing a lot. There's like an insane amount of metaphors and just really strange, pretentious sounding descriptions of things that I feel like are trying to create depth, but feel like so out of place and cobbled together. And I feel like the writing just sucks all of the fun out of the concept of the story. Some of the horror and gore aspects did make me feel sick, but I also wonder if it was like the writing style combined with the audiobook narrator's voice that was making me feel so on edge and just kind of like rushing to get through the story. Or if it actually was like the aspects in the story itself, if you know what I mean. Overall, I did not enjoy this, and I can't see myself picking up another one of these authors' works in the future. So I guess this is a fair warning if you're interested in this book and wondering why it is so disliked. It's not necessarily like the concept of the book that's bad, it's more like the actual execution. I think there's other books that talk about similar things that you can find with a much better like narrative structure. The last book that I read in November that we are going to be talking about is the third volume of the Scum Villain Self-Saving System by MXTX. This is obviously the third volume, but the overall arching storyline for this series follows the main character Shen Qingqiu, who is reincarnated in the body of the main villain from a web novel he was reading. His goal is to try and change the story so the main character Lu Ho Binghe does not end up hating him and killing him. However, he goes a little too far and basically makes Binghe fall in love with him, but also Binghe is like ultra possessive of him and basically becomes the new main villain in his attempts to get Qingqiu to love him back. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, which is the same rating I gave the previous 2 in the series. I think going back on this now, I probably would have given the previous 2 a 3.5, and then this one would be a 4 stars. This is definitely the best of the 3 I have read so far. I feel like my overall experience with the series was more like just frustration over the romance. For the first half, it was just like Qingqiu making his life so much harder from him not realizing that Binghe was in love with him. But it doesn't really get any better once he realizes that is the reason for Binghe's actions, because they have just such atrocious communication skills of like no sense of what the other person is trying to tell them. I feel like the saving grace of this book in particular was honestly all of the separate character development that went on. That gave the story a lot more depth and heart to it, and I actually was quite emotional by the end of it. I really loved Binghe, like, kind of finally admitting that all of his trauma is, like, rooted in this feeling of unwanted and being easily forgotten, and all of that coming back to his family history that's discussed in this book kind of really grounded him in a way that the previous volumes hadn't, and was one of those things that was making me have a hard time like him before now. I also feel like it did a lot to give the side characters more depth, which was definitely something I felt was lacking in the previous volumes. And I do really like a lot of the side characters now, and I'm now really excited to read the short story collection because I want to see all of those side characters' romances. Circling back to what I said before about the ratings of this book, I think overall Scum Villain is going to be more of like a 4-star series for me. Overall, this is a mid to enjoyable level series. I actually don't know if I would recommend this as like a starter Danmei series, which is often what I see this touted as in other lists. Honestly, I feel like Model Zushi has better characters, a more interesting plot, and I feel like Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji have just a much stronger relationship. It's also much more popular, so I think that that one overall just makes a little bit more sense as a starter Danmei series over this work, even though this is the one that came out earlier chronologically in MXTX's works. Since this book is also kind of somewhat written as a parody of other Danmei works, I think that it is more beneficial for you to have experienced the tropes in other series before tackling this one. With everything I just said about not really liking their relationship, I am reading the 4th volume now, which is all of the like post-canon short stories. And I am enjoying that a lot more. I feel like I just needed a little bit more time and depth for their relationship to make more sense for me. So hopefully the 4th volume will kind of tie up all the loose ends and really like solidify the relationships of these main characters for me more. And that is it for all of the books that I read in November. I'd love to hear down below what you've been reading lately. What was your favorite book you read this last month? What was your least favorite book? As always, I have my story graph listed in the description down below if you want to see what I'm reading in real time. Please consider liking this video or subscribing if you aren't already. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!